The Constitutional Court has recently made a ruling that affects the fight for housing in the inner city. Joining me, I've got Akhulile Notwala, a council for the Good Party and the provincial convener of Rise Mzansi. So, Akhulile, can you give me a brief history of Woodstock Hospital, known as Cissie Gool House, and also AKH, Ahmed Kathrada House?
Sure. Thank you. So, just to say first, this year, 2025, will mark 75 years since the Group Areas Act, and that's very important in this context. And it's also very important for people to understand that Cape Town has been governed by the Democratic Alliance for 19 years now, and that's important in this context. So, Cissie Gool House, CGH, is a hospital building. It's a former hospital building, similar to AKH. And these are buildings that have stood vacant for years. And I think it was probably in 2008 when there was a commitment for CGH to be developed into social housing. And we are here now, and nothing has happened. And because of that, and because of the struggle for land and housing and social housing and affordable housing in the inner city and surrounds, people chose to occupy that building and made homes. And it's not out of fun. And it's not out of fun because many of the people that live in CGH are people that have lived in Woodstock for all their lives. But because of the policy, which is driven again by the current governing party of gentrification, people have been kicked out of their homes because they can no longer afford. And so they became homeless and they chose to occupy Cissie Gool House, which is in Woodstock, and AKH, Ahmed Kathrada House, which is in Sea Point. But also these two buildings, the Cissie Gool House is under the local government, which is the city of Cape Town. And that's important for the speaker to know as well, because in the last council meeting, the speaker says, we don't even own this building. I mean, how can you be the one that's directing council and you don't know what's happening in council? And that's important. AKH is under the provincial government, but both have not been developed. And so the history of them is through frustration, homelessness, and people being evicted for a number of years. They chose to say there are buildings, there is land, there is space. Let's build our own homes because the government is failing.
So the community who lives at Cissie Gool House are mainly people who have been living in Woodstock, Salt River, and the inner city area. Many of them were displaced and evicted through gentrification. Others wanted to come and live here to be close to the opportunities and the amenities of the city. And the community who lives here is mainly made up of women-led households. And with the women-led households are the ones who normally are fighting to keep the roof over their families' heads. The women-led households are also the keepers of the home and the providers of the home.
Right, so these are residents mainly of Woodstock area, and I think that has an implication for the Constitutional Court ruling. Yeah. So in a nutshell, what did the Constitutional Court rule that affects the inhabitants of AKH and CGH?
So again, essentially, in short, and I'll explain, the Concord said, stop your apartheid mentality. Because what happened there is that a company bought blocks of homes which were occupied by people. Again, people who had lived in those homes for all their lives. And the company bought those homes and wanted to evict those people. When an eviction process happens, whether it's private or public, whether it's the government, whether it's a private individual that evicts, the government has to step in because the government has a responsibility to provide alternative accommodation. So when that eviction process was happening, the city was called in the court process. And the city wanted to give those families alternative accommodation 15 kilometers away from where they live. And that's been the policy of the city. Evict people, take them to Blikkiestop, which is 30 kilometers away from the city center. Evict people, take them to Philippi, one of the most dangerous townships in South Africa. And that disrupts people's homes, it disrupts people's families, it disrupts people's livelihoods. Because those people work in Woodstock, worked in the city center, their children go to school in these communities, and the city continues to implement this Group Areas Act policy that had existed for 75 years. And so the Constitutional Court simply said that, firstly, your emergency housing program, because when people are being evicted, you can use the emergency housing program to house them, is unconstitutional, because when you want to house them alternatively, you house them 15 kilometers away or 30 kilometers away. And so the Constitutional Court said, find a reasonable place within this surrounding where they have been living, so that they can continue their lives, so that their lives are not disrupted.